History often glorifies the clang of steel, the roar of conquest, and the rivers of blood spilled in pursuit of dominion. But what if the greatest victory wasn't etched in the annals of carnage, but whispered through generations as an act of profound, almost suicidal, compassion? What if the most formidable display of strength wasn't the cleaving of an enemy, but the deliberate, agonizing choice to spare them? Such is the forgotten saga of Kellen, known to his contemporaries as the Stoneheart, a warrior whose legend, though largely obscured by the relentless march of time and the bias of chronicles written by victors, offers a radical redefinition of triumph itself. Our journey begins in the fractured realm of Eredor, an age steeped in the iron tang of ceaseless conflict, roughly 3 millennia before the Great Unification. This was not a time of empires in the classical sense, but a crucible of warring clans and self-proclaimed kingdoms, each clinging to their sliver of fertile land or strategic pass with a desperate, often brutal, tenacity. Life was a relentless cycle of harvest and skirmish, punctuated by periods of famine and pestilence that made human life tragically cheap. The very air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, fear, and the metallic tang of drying blood. Superstition intertwined seamlessly with everyday survival. The spirits of the ancestors were invoked before every hunt and battle, and the ominous hoot of an owl could send shivers down the spine of even the most hardened mercenary. Legends were not mere bedtime stories, but living entities, shaping the worldview and choices of every man, woman, and child. From the craggy peaks of the north, where frost giants were said to slumber, to the sun-baked plains of the south, rumored to hide ancient, sentient forests, Eredor was a tapestry woven from myth and harsh reality. The central conflict that defined Kellen's era was the protracted, devastating war between the Sunstone Confederacy, a loose alliance of agrarian societies, and the Ironwood Dominion, a militant, expansionist tribal federation fueled by conquest and the worship of a vengeful war deity. Resources were scarce, particularly iron ore and arable land, and the cycle of raiding, reprisal, and large-scale confrontation had bled both sides dry for generations. Children were born into a world where the sword was a common sight, and the death wail a familiar sound. Loyalty was paramount, fear was a constant companion, and mercy, an unheard of weakness. Kellen, a towering figure even among the formidable warriors of the Sunstone Confederacy, emerged from the rugged, unforgiving valleys of the Ashfall clan, a people renowned for their stoicism and an unyielding connection to the earth. His name, Stoneheart, was earned not out of malice, but out of the sheer, unblinking determination he displayed on the battlefield. His movements were not the frenzied acrobatics of lighter skirmishers, but the deliberate, crushing force of an avalanche. Wielding a two-handed axe that many struggled to lift, Kellen moved through the maelstrom of battle like a force of nature, his face a mask of grim resolve. His reputation preceded him, a whispered litany of impossible feats, single-handedly holding a mountain pass against a raiding party twice his number, forging through a blizzard to rescue trapped villagers, and disarming a rogue beast in a wrestling match rather than slaying it outright. Yet, beneath the granite exterior lay a soul burdened by the relentless tide of suffering. He had seen to many fields soaked crimson, to many mothers weeping over fallen sons, to many futures extinguished before they could even blossom. He remembered the smell of his own village burning, the screams of his family during an Ironwood raid when he was but a boy. That raw, formative trauma had not calcified his heart into unfeeling stone, but had instead chiseled away at his certainties, leaving behind a gnawing doubt about the true course and meaning of victory. His days were a ceaseless grind of training, patrol, and preparation for the next inevitable clash, but his nights were often spent in quiet contemplation, gazing at the indifferent stars, questioning the very tenets of the warrior code he embodied. He wrestled with the teachings of his elders, that honor lay in absolute victory, that weakness invited destruction, against the stark reality of perpetual devastation. His personal struggles mirrored the greater conflict. How does one find a path to peace when all avenues seem to lead through the crucible of war? This internal conflict, often dismissed by his peers as melancholic introspection, was what subtly set him apart, even as his martial prowess remained unquestioned. The climax of this era of conflict arrived at the Battle of Whispering Pines, a strategic choke point nestled between two mountain ranges. The Ironwood Dominion, under the fearsome war chief Morgith, had launched a surprise offensive, aiming to cleave the Sunstone Confederacy in two. The fate of hundreds of thousands, perhaps even the entire future of the region, hung in the balance. Kellen, leading the vanguard, fought with a ferocity that bordered on madness, pushing his axe through shield walls and cleaving through armored warriors. The air was thick with dust, the cries of the dying, and the clanging symphony of steel. Hours bled into one another, until Kellen found himself face to face with Morgith himself. Morgith was a legend in his own right, a colossal figure adorned with battle trophies, his eyes burning with fanaticism. Their duel was the focal point of the entire battle, a maelstrom of raw power and skill. Kellen, with his methodical, crushing blows, eventually gained the upper hand. With a final, earth-shaking swing, his axe disarmed Morgith, sending the war chief's blade spinning into the dust. Morgith, disarmed and staggering, stood before Kellen, panting, bleeding, but defiant. The entire battlefield seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the final, inevitable blow that would end the Ironwood threat and cement Kellen's legend in blood. The custom, the expectation, the millennia of tradition, all dictated one outcome: the enemy leader's head mounted on a pike, a symbol of absolute dominance. Yet, at that crucial juncture, Kellen did something truly unprecedented. He lowered his axe. He did not sheath it, for such an act might be mistaken for surrender, but he lowered its menacing head to rest on the ground, a silent, stark declaration. He looked not at Morgith with hatred, but with a profound, weary understanding. Enough, Kellen's voice boomed, cutting through the din of the battle. This cycle ends now. Your people are broken. Ours are exhausted. There will be no more bloodshed today. The audacity of the act was staggering. A warrior of Kellen's stature, with the enemy chief at his mercy, choosing not to kill. It was an act that defied every tenet of the warrior code, every expectation of honor and victory in Eredor. His own allies stared in disbelief, ready to intervene, while the Ironwood warriors, seeing their chief's life spared, faltered, their ferocity draining away into stunned confusion. This wasn't merely a strategic decision. It was a visceral, personal rejection of the endless brutality that had defined his world. It was a gamble of epic proportions, risking not only his own life, but the fragile peace he sought. This single unconventional act of mercy, born from a blend of ancient folklore's emphasis on balance and the everyday struggles of a people yearning for peace, rippled outwards in ways no one could have foreseen. Its profound impact was ultimately obscured by the very passage of time it sought to mend. The immediate aftermath was chaotic. Kellen's own commanders were furious, seeing it as a monumental blunder, a betrayal of their fallen comrades. Morgith himself, initially bewildered, eventually accepted the truce, not out of admiration, but out of sheer pragmatic exhaustion and the unspoken fear that Kellen, having shown mercy, might also be capable of a terrifying, final brutality if provoked again. The Battle of Whispering Pines ended not with a triumphant rout, but with a tense, uneasy cessation of hostilities. In the short term, the Ironwood Dominion, leaderless and demoralized, retreated, giving the Sunstone Confederacy a much-needed reprieve. But Kellen's act had sown a seed, not of immediate peace, but of profound unease within the rigid structures of Eridorian society. The bards, who usually sang of heroic deeds and glorious deaths, struggled to encapsulate this unprecedented event. How could they glorify a victory that eschewed the very blood and vengeance that define their genre? It didn't fit the epic narrative of a warrior hero. The act was too complex, too nuanced for a culture steeped in the black and white morality of conquest and defeat. This is where the everyday struggles intersected with the grander narrative. The common folk, weary of war, saw a glimmer of hope, a potential end to their suffering, but their voices were drowned out by the protests of the elders and the military leadership, who feared that Kellen's weakness had merely prolonged the inevitable conflict. Over the next few decades, the peace held, albeit tenuously. Kellen, no longer revered as an unblemished hero, but often viewed with suspicion, dedicated his remaining years to fostering understanding between the two factions, laying the groundwork for what would eventually become the Great Unification. His vision, though initially dismissed as naive, slowly took root, nurtured by generations who had grown up without the constant threat of war. Yet, ironically, as the unified realm flourished, the true genesis of its peace faded into obscurity. The official histories, often written by those who favored martial glory or political expediency, tended to gloss over the unconventional aspects of Kellen's victory. They presented the unification as a natural evolution, a logical outcome of geopolitical forces, rather than the deliberate, almost sacrilegious act of mercy that catalyzed it. Kellen's name was remembered, but the pivotal moment at Whispering Pines was sanitized, reframed as a mere tactical advantage, rather than a profound moral choice. The memory of his act was too challenging, too subversive to the traditional narrative of power and conquest. It suggested that true strength lay not in destruction, but in restraint, not in domination, but in empathy. Such a truth, while transformative, was also inconvenient for those who wished to maintain power through conventional means. It was deemed a forgotten victory, because it had no impact, but because its impact was so radical that it threatened to rewrite the very definition of heroism and leadership. The story of Kellen the Stoneheart therefore stands as a testament to the enduring power of individual moral courage, a quiet rebellion against the deafening roar of war, and a poignant reminder that history often forgets its most revolutionary truths in its haste to celebrate the familiar.